I
thank the Ambassador of Sri Lanka for his statement. The Secretariat informs me that this draft decision has program budget implications. I will give the floor to Mr. Eldon Pierce, head of the section of Finance and Budget of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, for a statement.
Thank you. The revised draft resolution now before the Council contains a request for the Office of the High Commissioner to continue to monitor the human rights situation in Sri Lanka and assess progress towards accountability and reconciliation, to lead a comprehensive investigation into alleged serious violations and abuses of human rights and related crimes by both parties in Sri Lanka, and to present an oral update to the Human Rights Council at its 27th session, a comprehensive report followed by discussion on the implementation of the present resolution at its 28th session. Owing to the evolution of the draft resolution, the Secretariat has not benefited from the requisite 48-hour period in which to prepare and present a revised formal statement of financial implications for this resolution. Although additional planning and analysis will be required to more accurately estimate the full cost of the new mandated activities, preliminary estimates would be approximately $1,425,800 under Section 24 Human Rights and $35,100 under Section 2 Conference Services, for a total of approximately $1,460,900. This statement is presented to inform the Council that provisions have not been included under the programme budget for the biennium 2014-2015 to accommodate these activities, and thus additional appropriations will have to be requested. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Eldon Pierce. Now I give the floor to those Council members who would like to explain their vote before the vote on the draft decision on Sri Lanka. I see Pakistan. Are there any others? Cuba, India, Venezuela, China, Russian Federation. I will close the list now. Pakistan has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pakistan is opposed to country-specific resolutions in principle. This is because such resolutions are ineffective and counterproductive. Consent of the country concerned is imperative for tangible results to promote and protect human rights. Pakistan played a key role in the 2009 resolution on Sri Lanka with the consent and cooperation of that country. This resolution achieved positive results. Sri Lanka fully cooperated with the human rights machinery. It also demonstrated continued and tangible progress on the ground in addressing issues related to the reconciliation process, including accountability within the framework of Sri Lanka's domestic reconciliation process, the LLRC. Sri Lanka has a long and proud tradition of democracy. It has suffered for 30 years due to brutal terrorism by the LTTE, an internationally recognized terrorist organization. Eventually, it has succeeded in overcoming this menace of terrorism and separatism. The international community, including the UNHRC, should help and support Sri Lanka to heal its wounds and achieve reconciliation and lasting peace. It should not add fuel to the fire. Interference in the internal affairs of Sri Lanka is unacceptable. No self-respecting country would agree to the intrusive measures advocated in this resolution. In particular, operative paragraph 10 of the resolution is inconsistent with the principles and purposes of the UN Charter, which calls for respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states. We strongly believe that reference to international investigation as a monitoring and investigation role of the OHCHR in OP10 and signaling out the Northern Provincial Council for preferential treatment in OP6 are clear violations of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Sri Lanka. Such a preferential focus is inconsistent with PP9 of the current draft, which reaffirms that all Sri Lankans are entitled to the full enjoyment of their rights regardless of religion, belief or ethnicity. This highlights the inherent contradictions contained in this draft resolution. OP10 vests the OHCHR with an investigative mandate in violation of HRC Resolution 60/251 and the IB package. The OHCHR does not have the capacity or the resources to do so, as we have just heard from the Secretariat. The budgetary implications for the proposed mechanism are also not clear, due to the lack of clarity of the contours of the mandated activity in OP10. Mandated activities need to be carried out through the regular budget. Specificity of mandated activity or activities are therefore prerequisite with regard to the budget. Again, something that we have just heard from the Secretariat, and my delegation would like to know from where these funds will come. Because if these funds are to come from countries that have sponsored this resolution, it will obviously be seen as a process that will be tainted. Mr. President, OP10 also introduces a time frame into the investigation of alleged violations through reference to the period covered by the LLRC, which may be taken as from 2002 to 2009. This time frame, however, does not take into account the entire duration of the conflict, which spanned 30 years, and thereby excludes the atrocities and violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law committed by the LTTE terrorists prior to 2002. No inquiry can be justifiable and balanced without taking into account the entire duration of the conflict. The allegation of the absence of a credible domestic process to address issues of accountability is not substantiated by evidence, given the range of processes under implementation within the framework of the reconciliation process, including the LLRC, of which the Council has been briefed in detail by the Sri Lankan delegation. Mr. President, this resolution is about politics, not about human rights. This resolution is also a crass example of hypocrisy and double standards. It selectively targets the government of Sri Lanka but fails to hold to account the LTTE terrorists who indulged in mass murder of innocent people for 30 years. Moreover, the main sponsors of this resolution are hardly in a position to hold Sri Lanka to account, given their own track record of human rights violations. For more than a decade, they have and continue to indulge in a consistent pattern of gross human rights violations, including illegal renditions, incommunicado detentions, torture, and extrajudicial killings, all behind the smokescreen of fighting terrorism. While maintaining a conspiracy of silence over their own misdeeds, these countries arrogate to themselves the right to sit in judgment over others. This Council must therefore reject such duplicity. For these reasons, Mr. President, and as a first step, Pakistan calls for a vote for the deletion of operative paragraph 10 of this resolution. I thank you, Mr. President.
Well, I take it that in the statement of the Ambassador of Pakistan, his delegation is requesting a vote on paragraph 10. First, let me give the floor to the other speakers, and then we'll get back to this. India has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this Council has adopted 3 resolutions on Sri Lanka since May 2009, when the 3-decades-old conflict in that country ended. India has always been of the view that the end of the conflict in Sri Lanka provided a unique opportunity to pursue a lasting political settlement acceptable to all communities in Sri Lanka, including the Tamils. India believes that this Council's efforts should contribute to a state's own efforts in the promotion and protection of human rights. We are strongly supportive of Sri Lanka's continued engagement with the OHCHR. We encourage the High Commissioner to continue to provide technical assistance in accordance with the relevant HRC resolutions. We are also supportive of close engagement of the UN special procedures with the government of Sri Lanka. It was in this spirit that India supported the resolutions adopted by the Council in 2012 and 2013, which sought to promote such cooperation. During the past year, there have been some notable developments in Sri Lanka. The government of Sri Lanka has honored its commitment to the international community to hold elections to the Northern Provincial Council. Further, it has taken steps to implement some of the important recommendations of the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission, the LLRC, such as the trilingual policy promoting the official use of the Tamil language and the upgrading of schools in the northern and eastern provinces. The High Commissioner's report mandated by this Council's resolution of 2013 on Sri Lanka rightly acknowledges the progress made in reconstruction, resettlement and implementation of some of the recommendations made by the LLRC. At the same time, the report also notes that the government of Sri Lanka has failed to ensure independent and credible investigations into past violations of international human rights and humanitarian law. The implementation of the LLRC's recommendations lies at the core of reconciliation and accountability in Sri Lanka. India continues to underscore that the report of the LLRC and its findings and recommendations provide a window of opportunity to forge a consensual way forward towards a lasting political settlement. We call for effective and timely implementation of all the constructive recommendations contained in the LLRC report, including those pertaining to missing persons, detainees, reduction of high security zones, return of private lands by the military, and withdrawal of security forces from the civilian domain in the Northern Province. As mentioned earlier, the elections of the Northern Provincial Council in September 2013 were a significant step forward. However, much more needs to be done by the government of Sri Lanka towards a meaningful devolution of powers. It needs to continue to take specific measures towards broad-based, inclusive, meaningful and genuine reconciliation with the minority Tamil community. We call on the government of Sri Lanka to make purposeful efforts to fulfill its commitments, including on the devolution of political authority through the full implementation of the 13th Amendment of the Constitution of Sri Lanka and build upon it. Mr. President, as the closest neighbor with thousands of years of relations with Sri Lanka, we cannot remain untouched by the developments in that country. Since the end of the armed conflict, India remains engaged in a substantial way in the relief, resettlement, rehabilitation and reconstruction process in Sri Lanka. We have extended substantial assistance to the government of Sri Lanka in its efforts for resettlement of internally displaced persons, demining, education, connectivity, livelihood restoration, economic revival, etc. This has contributed towards the return of a modicum of normalcy to the northern and eastern provinces. In asking the Office of the High Commissioner to investigate, assess and monitor the human rights situation in Sri Lanka, the resolution ignores the progress already made by the country in this field and places in jeopardy the cooperation currently taking place between the government of Sri Lanka and the Office of the High Commissioner and the Council's special procedures. Besides, the resolution is inconsistent and impractical in asking both the government of Sri Lanka and the Office of the High Commissioner to conduct investigations simultaneously. India believes that it is imperative for every country to have the means of addressing human rights violations through robust national mechanisms. The Council's efforts should therefore be in a direction to enable Sri Lanka to investigate all allegations of human rights violations through comprehensive, independent and credible national investigative mechanisms and bring to justice those found guilty. Sri Lanka should be provided all assistance it deserves in a cooperative and collaborative manner. Mr. President, it has been India's firm belief that adopting an intrusive approach that undermines national sovereignty and institutions is counterproductive. Any significant departure from the core principles of constructive international dialogue and cooperation has the potential to undermine efforts of this Council for promoting universal respect for the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Moreover, any external investigative mechanism with an open-ended mandate to monitor national processes for protection of human rights in a country is not reflective of the constructive approach of dialogue and cooperation envisaged in the UN General Assembly Resolution 60/251 that created the HRC in 2006 as well as the UNGA Resolution 65/281 that reviewed the HRC in 2011. We are therefore concerned that the resolution has the potential to hinder the efforts of the country rather than contribute constructively to its efforts and hence inadvertently complicate the situation. Mr. President, it is for these reasons that my delegation cannot go along with the resolution and will abstain in the vote on it. Thank you.